Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Monday, June 24th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the latest film and TV news. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta. And joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And Writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello, folks.
So news has come to a halt once again after we had the busy Friday. I don't know when movie news is going to pick up. I think like all of Hollywood is on vacation. Maybe it'll happen next month with Comic-Con. But we have put together a show of news items for you today. The first of which is very interesting, and then we're going to talk about some comic book movies that almost happened, and we're going to follow that up with a kind of spoiler discussion of Toy Story 4 and talking about, is Toy Story 5 a possibility? So, okay, let's start things off with the most interesting news item that we're going to talk about. And that is that they are making they're developing a Flash Gordon movie with Taika Waititi. Chris, what do we know?
We don't know much, and part of this story aggravated me for how vague it was. So, the original report said, quote, that Taika Waititi has come into, quote, crack an animated Flash Gordon movie, and that's a fancy way of saying they don't really know what he's doing. The report says he might write and direct it, but it also says that it's too early to say for sure. All we can say for sure is Disney/Fox is developing an animated Flash Gordon movie, and Taika Waititi is involved in it in some capacity. I don't know how he's going to fit this into his schedule because, you know, he's going to make Akira next, I believe. So maybe this would come much later, but we know that it's happening.
And we had assumed another Thor movie. Like everybody, I mean, maybe that's a bad assumption on our part, right?
I mean, yeah, nothing's official there yet, but yeah, I don't know where this fits into his schedule, but that's the story as of now. There's an animated Flash Gordon movie, and he's involved in it in some capacity.
Are you a fan of Flash Gordon?
I really don't know much about the character. I've seen, snippets of the 1980 movie, which I don't think is like the best representation of the character. I mean, I'm a fan of Taika Waititi, so if he is involved with this, I'll be interested in it for his involvement. But beyond that, I can't say for sure.
It definitely seems like a sci-fi property that I could see Taika giving his own comedic spin to. Do you know what I mean? Like it, and it's not like, I mean, I'm sure there are Flash Gordon fans out there, but it's not like there is a tightness of fandom that you have to stick to every little thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's a lot to play with Flash Gordon.
Yeah, it's definitely a character. I mean, the character originated in 1934, so there's been a long history, and there's definitely room to sort of like have fun with the character and goof around a bit, not take it too seriously.
Ben, I feel like you might be a person who has watched some of those like early Flash Gordon short films.
I've never seen any of those. I have seen the 1980 movie, and I love the sort of extreme campiness of it. I think it's a lot of fun as just this sort of sci-fi space adventure, like very out there, super colorful, really bright. The idea of making this into an animated property is super interesting to me because I feel like you could do something along the lines of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse with this, and even have like, bring in the iconic Queen score and soundtrack from the original movie in some capacity, especially with somebody like Taika involved, like you're saying, not taking this too seriously and maybe having multiple Flash Gordons run around. I mean, there are so many different possibilities for storylines that you could do in a space epic like this.
I just love after Disney acquired Fox, everybody was waiting for, a Marvel Cinematic Universe X-Men movie, and the first thing that we hear about that they're developing is a Flash Gordon film, animated movie with Taika Waititi. So, I think that's a good sign for what's to come, but who knows? Okay, let's talk about a couple crazy comic book movies that almost happened. Let's start off first with Steven Seagal was almost Batman. Brad, what is going on here?
So back when Warner Brothers was simply developing the first Batman movie that became Tim Burton's Batman in 1989 with Michael Keaton, they were trying to figure out who should actually play Bruce Wayne and Batman. And since we are recently celebrating the 30th anniversary of Batman. This past weekend actually was the exact anniversary on June 23rd, when Batman hit theaters back in 1989. Screenwriter Sam Hamm talked to Sci-Fi Wire and discussed what was happening early on in development, and that Warner Brothers was actually looking for an action star to play Batman, focusing more on the idea of Batman as this superhero who fights crime, as opposed to the core of the character, which is meant to be Bruce Wayne, as Batman. You have to have a good Bruce Wayne in order to have a good Batman. And apparently one of the suggestions that Warner Brothers had was Steven Seagal. And that might seem laughable by today's standards, since now he's this, lawman who has his own reality TV show on A&E and makes awful straight-to-DVD bargain bin action movies. But at the time Batman was being developed, he had kind of come out of nowhere, was this really good martial artist, and he it apparently was like the next big thing for action at the time. And so there were a lot of people had their eyes on Steven Seagal for these kind of projects, and it never really went beyond being a consideration. Like they never brought him in to read or anything like that. But imagining Batman with Steven Seagal is certainly that's a choice.
I can't even imagine Steven Seagal as Batman or Bruce Wayne. Like, that doesn't even compute in my head. Chris, what would that movie have been?
It would be amazing. No, I don't. I mean, it's hard to separate the Steven Seagal of today from the Steven Seagal of, the 80s, which is when this was being developed. And it might have worked in the 80s. I mean, he made a few movies where I don't think I would call him a good actor in them, but he was good for what the part demanded of him. And, Batman doesn't have a lot of lines, so he wouldn't have to talk a lot. So it might have worked. I don't know. It is very strange to think about.
So you're
the problem is that the character, that the person also has to play Bruce Wayne. So, like in the 1989 movie, Michael Keaton brought some charisma and, charm and a little bit of comedy to that character. And Steven Seagal, I just feel like that's not there for him.
What if they took the take that this is a Batman movie where you don't see Bruce Wayne, it's just Batman? I mean, that's almost as absurd as Steven Seagal playing Batman.
Yeah, maybe.
I was just going to say they'd have to poke a hole in the back of the cowl for his ponytail to fit back there.
That would have been ridiculous. That would have been almost as ridiculous as that Fantastic Four movie that was made back in, what was that, the 80s or 90s?
Oh, I think it was the 94 or something, 94. The Roger Corman one?
Yeah. I can't imagine it being better than that. But, okay, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about, there was almost a Beast spin-off film. It was a script developed by X-Men editor-composer John Ottman. Ben, what do we know?
Yeah, so John Ottman is the guy who composed and edited several X-Men movies. He did X-Men 2, X-Men Days of Future Past, and X-Men Apocalypse. And while he was editing Apocalypse, his assistant, a guy named Byron Burton, came to him with the idea of writing a movie about Beast, the character who's played by Nicholas Hoult in these new movies. And John Ottman sort of said, yeah, go for it, write the script. I don't really think this is ever going to happen, but sure, go for it, write the script. And so he did, and he sort of pitched it to John Ottman. And after he read this draft, he thought that this is actually maybe good enough to work with a budget of about $90 million. And the story begins in the late 1980s in an Inuit village. The script for this whole thing is available online, by the way, and we've linked to it in the show notes. If you want to read it, you can. But the basic gist of it is it begins in an Inuit village in the late 1980s where a creature is terrorizing the residents. And the Hollywood Reporter has a sort of brief rundown of the gist of the story, which is about Beast, a.k.a. Hank McCoy, who's living in the X-Mansion and keeping his mutation in check with a special serum that was introduced in Days of Future Past. There's a danger room sequence where Hank is having trouble controlling his nature, and he basically loses control. Hank has been helping a scientist who has a similar mutation, and he gives this serum out to him, but then things go wrong, and Beast is trying to track this guy down, and he realizes that this person that he was helping is the one who's been terrorizing this Inuit village all along. And there's this big showdown where Hank teams up with Wolverine, who Professor X has located using Cerebro, and the end of the film reveals a tag that shows that Mr. Sinister has been watching the proceedings the whole time.
Of course he has.
Yeah, and Mr. Sinister, of course, actually appeared in the post-credits scene of X-Men Apocalypse. So it sounds like there were some big plans in the works maybe for that character before, obviously, the Disney acquisition sort of put an end to all of this.
Well, Mr. Sinister didn't appear in the credit scene, but there was a reference to the company that has ties.
Right, yes, the Essex Corporation or something along those lines, yeah.
So it sounds like this is kind of like a Wolfman-esque take on a Beast spin-off film.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not sure if Nicholas Holt's Beast was interesting enough as a character to sustain a full movie, but I guess Simon Kinberg, who is the creative architect of a lot of these X-Men movies, basically just declined to read the script because he was still working on Dark Phoenix at the time and didn't want to be influenced by any of those ideas. And it just sounded like
he didn't want to be interrupted on the great movie he was in the process of making.
Right. It just sounded like this was like a sort of a what-if scenario, but it never really got super far down the development path.
I mean, I do love the idea of, doing comic book movies that are not just comic book movies. I know Marvel's kind of doing that with genres. I know we've talked about James Wan is doing The Trench, which is kind of a horror movie set in the DC Aquaman world. I do want to talk about this. Also, there is a Spider-Man horror movie that almost happened in the 1980s. Chris, you wrote about this for the site a couple weeks back. What was this going to be?
So it sounds like, based on what we know about this project, that the powers that be, it was actually Canon Films, who were notorious for making B movies in the 80s and the early 90s.
Which, by the way, if no one has seen, what's that documentary called, Chris, about Canon Films? I'm sure you've seen it.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I can't remember the name of it, but
well, everybody, if you have not seen that documentary and you don't know about Canon Films, you should go seek out this documentary. I'm sure it's on Netflix or something.
It is. It's called Electric Boogaloo: The Wild Untold Story of Canon Films. It's on Netflix right now.
That's it.
Yeah.
So they at one point had the rights to Spider-Man, believe it or not, and apparently they just took a look at the title, which was Spider-Man, and thought, all right, that's all we need to know. So the project they cooked up sounds a lot like David Cronenberg's The Fly remake, in that the main character, the Peter Parker in this version, he ends up mutating into this giant 8-armed spider human monster, and he's so horrified at his monstrousness that he wants to kill himself, which is pretty much the plot of The Fly. So it sounds like that's what they were going for here. Tobe Hooper, who directed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and depending on who you ask, directed Poltergeist, was originally going to direct. And there's no telling on how close this came to be, but apparently Stan Lee is the one who put the kibosh on this, and he hated this script because it wasn't a superhero movie. So they did a rewrite, and when they rewrote it as a more traditional superhero movie, Tobe Hooper left because he wasn't interested in making that. And eventually the project never even happened at Canon in general, and then, as we all know, Sam Raimi eventually got a hold of it and he made it, which is kind of interesting because Sam Raimi was also a horror filmmaker, but he didn't try and make it a horror film.
Yeah. Stan Lee was our hero once again. So I'm wondering, you guys, which of these projects would you be into? If you could travel to a different multiverse and see one of these projects, would you be interested in seeing the Steven Seagal Batman, the Beast spinoff from John Ottman, or the Tobe Hooper Spider-Man horror movie?
I mean, I would love the Tobe Hooper Spider-Man movie. I mean, I have no interest in the Beast movie, maybe the Steven Seagal Batman movie, but if I had to pick one of these three, it would definitely be Tobe Hooper's weird, depressing mutant Spider-Man.
Yeah, same for me. Definitely Spider-Man out of these three.
Brad?
Yeah, that's what I'm going for, too. That just sounds so weird that I would just want to see it immediately.
Oh, Peter, also, before we move on entirely, I was misinformed about that Canon movie. It's not on Netflix right now, but it's still out there, maybe on the disc plan or something, so people can track it down. But just, to save the emails.
Yeah.
It's not on Netflix right this second.
I mean, I think I'm most curious about the Steven Seagal Batman movie, because that sounds the most bonkers. Like, I can imagine what the Spider-Man movie is. As much as I'd like to see that, I can't imagine what Steven Seagal as Batman could possibly be. Like, I want to see that. But we'll never will. Okay, let's talk about the box office this weekend. Toy Story 4 was basically a juggernaut. Brad, how did it do?
Well, it topped the box office, and but I wouldn't say that it was necessarily a juggernaut. It did easily win the weekend with 118 million. However, it also underperformed from the expectations that the studio had for its total this weekend, because going into the weekend, they were expecting it to make around 140 million, if not a little bit more. So that's a pretty significant amount less than what they were expecting. And I feel
so
like
how much did it make?
It made 118 million.
Oh, 118, wow.
Yeah, so it's not a disappointment, because obviously this movie is going to be very successful. It's, the global box office was also good, and there's not a ton of competition that this movie is going to have among families, with the exception of Spider-Man: Far From Home, until Disney faces themselves with The Lion King in toward the end of July. So the movie will still do very well. Kids are still out of summer, but it does seem like this kind of continues this idea that audiences are kind of sick of reboots, sequels, remakes, whatnot, especially this summer, because there's been a constant stream of disappointing movies at the box office, and a lot of people thought that Toy Story 4 would kind of come in and save the day. But the fact that this movie still underperformed a little bit kind of shows that this doesn't really seem to be going anywhere this summer. And if you need any more evidence of that, the reboot of Child's Play also didn't do very well. It opened at number 2, but it only raked in 14 million, and that was a little bit below expectations as well, since the studio was looking at around a 16 to 18 million dollar opening weekend.
Okay, so 118 million. I'm sure with like you said, there's not much competition, so we'll probably see like maybe a 3 times multiple of that. So we're at like what, 350 or 60 million, right?
Probably.
So that puts it number 2 with only Toy Story 3 above it. So I don't think that's a failure.
No, it's not. A lot of people are saying that it's a disappointment and a failure. I don't think that it's that by any means. It's it was also the biggest opening weekend for the franchise. Granted that it's not adjusted for inflation, but this is still a success for Disney and Pixar, no matter which way you slice it. You can argue the concept of audience fatigue when it comes to franchises just being thrust upon them all throughout summer. But if anything, I think maybe one of the things to blame is just that, like a lot of us, we were all skeptical of whether or not we really needed Toy Story. And maybe there's a lot of people who are waiting to see what people thought after the first weekend and waiting on word of mouth to see whether or not it's something that they should go out of their way to check out or not.
Yeah, I think that's probably it. I think, like, even us who had seen it, Chris, you still haven't seen this movie, right?
No, I have not. I'll get around to it sooner or later. I just did not have a chance to see it.
Okay, I want to have a discussion about if there could be a Toy Story 5 and what that could be and stuff like that. So, Chris, we're going to leave you here, but thanks for joining us.
Sure.
Okay, so if you have not seen Toy Story 4, I guess probably turn off this podcast now, because we're going to be discussing some heavy spoilers of what happens in that movie and how that movie ends. So if you want to join in on the spoiler discussion, you're welcome to, but you have been warned. There's spoilers coming up. Okay, so Jacob had an interview with Josh Cooley, the director of the film, and the 2 producers, and the subject came up of making more Toy Story movies. Ben, what did they say?
Yeah, so during Jacob's interview, he mentioned that with the way that this new movie concludes, he would be perfectly happy if Pixar decided to basically leave the franchise where it is. And he wondered if conversations about Toy Story 5 had taken place yet, because obviously Pixar is a movie studio that develops stuff years in advance. It takes a long time for their projects to sort of come to fruition. So he was wondering if any of those early conversations had happened yet. And Josh Cooley, the director, said, "It has not happened, and I 100% agree with you. I would be totally happy if this was the end." Mark Nielsen, who's a producer, said, "We've been totally focused on 4, so we haven't really thought beyond that. I mean, we never know what the future holds. We didn't think there was going to be a 4. We didn't think there was going to be a 3 after we finished 2. And Jonas Rivera, who's one of the other producers, said, "We felt like Woody needed to have a completion to his arc, and we've done that. We feel satisfied with it." So, as Nielsen mentioned there, we never know what the future holds. That always leaves the door open for possibilities, but it sounds like this whole thing was just to really complete Woody's arc as a character, and it sounds like they are happy that they've accomplished that goal. But I don't know, Peter, Brad, what do you guys think? Would you be interested in seeing a Toy Story 5?
Well, let's talk about the ending of this movie. So this movie ends with Woody deciding to leave the toys and to go off on his own adventure with the lost toys and join Bo Peep, who he has, I guess, an alluded to romantic relationship, although it's not really. Is it a romantic relationship?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they've always been flirtatious with each other and that kind of thing, especially in the first one. So
Woody runs off with the girl, with the lost toys, and the toys go back to Bonnie. It is. I mean, I do agree with Josh that this is a closure for Woody's story. But I guess the question here, is this a closure for Buzz's story? Is this... They've also set up all these interesting characters like Forky and Duke Kaboom, which I'm sure people might want to see more of those people. So I'm wondering, like, is there a reason to have a Toy Story 5? Ben, what do you think?
I don't know. I was wondering about this. So I went to see Toy Story 4 with my wife, who's the biggest Toy Story fan that I know. And as soon as we walked out of the theater, I was like asking her, I was like, they're definitely done now, right? Like, this story is over. And she sort of, on the fly, off the top of her head, just pitched a Toy Story 5 to me that I want to steal and then repurpose for this conversation. And I was developing this with her a little bit further today, right before we started recording. But basically, she said that because Woody and Bo Peep and those characters are part of a traveling carnival, they could circle back around and meet up with Buzz and the rest of Bonnie's toys in some sort of future instance later. So we were talking about, like, what a story could possibly be. And she came up with this idea that, like, the Buzz Lightyear toys, all of them across the country, are being recalled. So, like, what if Woody and Bo Peep see on TV an announcement that all of the Buzz toys are being recalled, and they try to save Buzz? They are part of this carnival, so when it gets back around to whatever town they live in, Woody and Bo and Duke Kaboom and those characters head back to find Buzz, but maybe when they show up at Bonnie's house, like, the house is abandoned and they have to piece together clues to track down Buzz or something. So that was, an idea that I thought might be able to, sort of what you're talking about, Peter, put the focus back on Buzz a little bit and maybe give him some sort of completion, have like a split story where they're trying to track him down, and maybe you follow Buzz and the other characters and track his growth and arc along the way.
Yeah, but I feel like, I think, didn't they have the idea of, like, the Buzz recall thing? That was, like, one of the original ideas for Toy Story 2, I think.
Oh, was it? I didn't know that.
I think
That's
so. Cool. I could be wrong.
Yeah, there was. I'm pretty sure that it was Buzz where there was some kind of recall, and, like, he ended up going to Japan or something because of it. Wasn't that what the story was?
Which, by the way, that could be amazing. It probably wasn't going to be amazing, but it could be amazing. I don't know. Like, I do like that pitch. I think that would be a good movie, but I'm just wondering, is that mystery plot of saving Buzz and finding, that whole search, is that enough reason to do another one? Like, that to me, as much as that sounds like it could be a good film, sounds like it's another episode, like, we need to make another sequel. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, is there a reason beyond that? Like,
it would have to be whoever is directing this would have to actually inject some pathos and, like, thematic resonance to it, right? Because that's the magic of these Toy Story movies in particular, is that, yeah, their surface plots are really good, but, like, what they're actually saying about the world and these characters is the stuff that really gives the film its heart. So you would have to get somebody who is paid a lot more than the nothing that my wife and I were when we came up with this concept to be able to do that.
And just to confirm, the original plot for Toy Story 3 was that Buzz was getting recalled and needed to be shipped off to his manufacturing company in Taiwan to fix a malfunction. and the rest of the toys launched a rescue mission to try to save him.
That is pretty cool.
The other thing that occurs to me is, like, I know Pixar, is decades old at this point, and you have this plot with Woody, and also, like, in Cars 3, you also have this other plot with Lightning McQueen, where these characters are starting to question what their purpose and their role in life is, and maybe, they're past the... They're reaching middle age, right? And they're trying to discover, like, maybe my purpose in life isn't this. Maybe it's something else. And I'm kind of wondering, is that because of all these creative people at Pixar are reaching that age? What do you guys think?
No, I think that's totally fair to say. And, like, I think that fits right along with the audience, too, because one of the things that I have kind of loved about this franchise is how it has grown with both kids who were young enough to see the original movie in theaters in 1995, that they were very young, and now that they've grown up, the franchise has kind of grown with them. But also the parents of those kids who had younger kids in 1995 who have seen their kids grow up and go off to college and become adults and start having their own kids. And as the stories have progressed, the movies have kind of addressed the kind of hardships that you deal with, whether you're the parents of those kids or the kids, growing up. And so I think this one perfectly represents that. How do you live your life when you aren't, taking care of the person that you've been taking care of your whole life? What do you do next? What's that next chapter of your life look like?
What would be your pitch if they were going to make a Toy Story 5? Brad, like, I know, like, or actually, do you even think they should make a Toy Story 5?
I will say that I don't think that they should make a Toy Story 5, only because I feel like even though Buzz Lightyear has been a very important character in the Toy Story franchise, and the other supporting characters are great fun, the franchise to me has always belonged to Woody. The first movie is about him feeling forgotten and obsolete when Buzz Lightyear comes in. The second one is about him seeing that there are other toys who are just like him and that maybe he shouldn't be just someone's plaything. The third one is about growing up and kind of letting go of the person you spent your whole life with and seeing what's next on the horizon. And this fourth one is about starting the next chapter of your life and realizing that maybe you don't have to just simply live your life for somebody else. And so I feel like Buzz has been an integral part of Woody's life, but he's really never been the lead character to me. And so while you could do a Toy Story 5 where Buzz maybe struggles with being the new, de facto leader of the toys, and that kind of thing, I feel like you're going to start treading familiar territory. But at the same time, if you wait, 10 years, 15 years, something like that, there could be an interesting kind of sort of reboot where maybe Buzz Lightyear suddenly has to deal with the same thing Woody did, where they've come out with a new, 25th anniversary edition of Buzz Lightyear, who is way more advanced and has so many cool new gadgets and a lot more lines to say, and actually interacts with the kids, in the same way that toys have advanced, for kids today. But then, like I said, again, you start to tread familiar territory as you did with the first Toy Story.
Do you think they could do another Toy Story movie where it just follows Buzz and those toys and Woody isn't even a part of it?
I they could, sure. Anything is possible. And if after being a naysayer of Toy Story 4 and seeing what Pixar pulled off, I will never doubt them again. And if they think a story is good enough to do, then I will trust them and I will see it. But at the same time, they can only do have such a story that has this amount of finality and emotion to it so many times before it's just come on, guys, what are we doing here? So on a maybe a more twisted and unlikely note, maybe it would be interesting to see the toys living in the desolate post-apocalyptic wasteland that we see in WALL-E, since there aren't any humans around and the toys don't have anything to do.
I think that's too dark for Pixar.
Just a little.
I feel like years from now, people are going to be pining for a reunion of Buzz and Woody, although I can't really think of a good reason other than maybe what Amy came up with.
Wait, here we go. Here it is. So this will make it less darker than the post-apocalyptic version. It'll still cross over with WALL-E, but the toys are now on the ship with all the humans that left Earth. And you find out that they were somehow part of the helping the ship to get back to Earth while Wally and Eve were doing their thing too. Boom!
The toys are all
So basically
brutally murdered, and they show up in the land of the dead from Coco.
Woody, a Pixar story.
Being born right here, guys.
I don't know. The other thing I'm thinking about is like, and maybe I'm getting pulled outside the main characters, which are the toys. But if I'm thinking about Andy, like Andy has gone away, he's given up the toys, but I feel like one day Andy is gonna want, like, as any kid who grows up and gives away his toys, you have a nostalgia and you want to reconnect with your childhood. Like, maybe there's something there, but I mean, I guess I'm looking at the motives from the outside source and not the inside.
Yeah, what would the toys do in that scenario? Like, what would their story be?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I'm wondering if anybody out there who has seen this film has any good pitches for Toy Story 5. Please send it to us, peter@slashfilm.com, and maybe we'll read it on a future episode. But that brings us to the end of today's episode. You can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can find the links to the stories we talked about on today's show in the show notes. This podcast, Slash Film Daily, is published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends. Spread the word. And we'll see you tomorrow.